If you don't know what the Alcatraz prison is, it's basically an island in San Francisco, and it's basically really hard to get out of. It's held pretty famous criminals like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Frank Morris. So we're gonna see what it would actually feel like to stay in this prison. Here we go.
San Francisco's hottest tourist attractions these days are a big red bridge and an abandoned prison. But before it was a $60 tour for the whole family, Alcatraz was a max security federal prison that was home to a lot of very bad dudes. And yes, strictly dudes. Today we're going to explore what it was like to be a prisoner in Alcatraz. Alcatraz had a strict
There was one inmate per cell rule.
maximum occupancy for its cells, topping off at just one inmate per jail cell.
Wow, that was small, dude. Look how small that is. One person.
Topping off at just one inmate per jail cell. Alcatraz was generally kept at a capacity of 330 men, which meant individual cells allowing for assured safety and privacy. This resulted in Alcatraz being the sort of Mykonos of prison destinations for some federal prisoners, requesting this all-inclusive hotspot for their mandatory stays. Cells were divided into blocks, with blocks B and C housing 336 cells measuring a cozy 5 feet.
Oh wow, those are all cells right there. 1, 2, 3, those are all cells.
9 feet. Cell block A was the real fixer-upper of the blocks. A broken down row of cells with so much unlocked potential, this block was not used to house inmates for any significant amount of time. Cell block D was reserved for those sent to solitary confinement, and though those cells were larger than the typical cells, inmates were forced to spend 24 hours a day in this space.
24 hours a day. I would lose my mind.
With one weekly exception, to spend some time in the recreation yard.
I would lose my
Solitary
mind.
confinement could last anywhere from a few days to several weeks, and as a former inmate Jim Quillen put it, a day in the hole was like an eternity.
Because when you're in a confined space, time just goes slower. It's weird. But I can definitely understand what he's saying. Time goes way slower.
Prisoners in Alcatraz were given the rights to only 4 guaranteed things: food, clothing, shelter, and medical care, while other privileges, like access to the library, were earned. When a prisoner arrived at Alcatraz, donning the standard stamped prison uni after the clothes they arrived in were taken and inmates were showered. While in the clothing room, they were also strip searched and given cursory medical examinations.
That is so uncomfortable. If I had to do that, that would be very uncomfortable. Just have 3, 4 people.
The residents of Alcatraz were given 3 meals a day.
I mean, how are you going to escape that? Sorry I keep pausing, but how are you going to escape that? Seriously.
Their head that they legally
It's
could
on an
not leave,
island.
and visitation access to hospital care if they ever should need it. The hospital at Alcatraz also provided dental and psychiatric services as well. Until the 1950s, there was a physician in residence, but due to budget cuts, the position was eliminated in favor of contracted doctors in the final years the prison was open. The hospital also became the permanent home for the very sick inmates, with some even serving out huge chunks of their sentence in the infirmary. The Birdman of Alcatraz, Robert Stroud, spent 11 of his 17 years in the hospital due to both a kidney infection and Birdman's need
Wow, 11 years in the hospital, man.
to be isolated from people on account of him being dangerous. The library
Prisoners could earn access to the library and other
of
activities.
Alcatraz had stacks on stacks on stacks of books for inmates to read should they earn the privilege to do so, a privilege that could also be taken away for misbehavior. Inmates couldn't visit the library at all. Instead, each morning, those with library privileges filled out a card
The art of color mixing.
requesting items they could find from a catalog. These items, be it books, magazines, and the like, were delivered to their cells with all crime-related content removed ahead of time. Since reading was one of the few leisurely activities inmates could look forward to, some took full advantage of what the library had to offer, using the opportunity to study law, learn other languages, or take
Wow, study law in a whole prison sentence. Imagine going to prison and then coming out learning how to be a lawyer or something.
correspondence classes offered by the University of California at Berkeley. Other leisurely endeavors the inmates could earn with good behavior included recreational activities such as chess or softball, and also visits with family members and work duty. In the 1950s, prisoners were given access to headsets so they could listen to the radio and watch movies in the auditorium.
That's pretty cool. Considering it's Alcatraz, I would just think they would get no freedom, but it's still cool that they can get some of that stuff.
Just like with library privileges, any of these could be taken away if the inmate stepped out of line. The Alcatraz Band,
Prisoners had the opportunity to play in the inmate band. Oh, wow, that's pretty
and
cool.
awesomely called the Rock Islanders, were made up of inmates who had earned the right to jam out. Though a revolving door of members throughout the years, positions within the band were highly coveted. Even Al Capone himself begged to be let in, which eventually he was. Capone wrote to his son he had learned to play the tenor
Al Capone, dude. I know he was in here, but a musician?
guitar, tenor banjo, and was learning how to play the mandola, and eventually learned how to play more than 500 songs. The band itself was, according to former guard George Gregory, only a cut above the 4th or 5th grade band, but it did wonders for their self-esteem. The band
A cut above the 4th or 5th grade. That means they sucked so bad.
played on holidays in the dining hall, with Sunday and special event performances sprinkled in as well. Inmates could purchase their instruments, but after regulations issued in 1956, could only practice between 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Any instrument played outside these parameters would result in the confiscation of said instrument and disciplinary action to the inmate playing. Cells at Alcatraz were
Cells were basic.
quite small and didn't come with much. Just
Yeah,
a
look how
cot,
small that is. You got your table, your bed. That's not even a bed. Do you even have a mattress for that? Or I'm guessing that's how you sleep. Literally on that. A toilet and a sink. That's it. That's all you have.
wash basin, and a toilet. When future Yelp reviewer and pretty bad dude Jim Quellen arrived at Alcatraz, he remarked that his new living quarters were pretty subpar, noting that all he saw was a steel bed, a straw mattress, and a dirty, lumpy pillow. He went on to note the toilet had no seat, and the wash basin only had one tap, which was only for cold water. Inmates were not allowed to bring in outside items, and Alcatraz didn't exactly have a gift shop yet, so creature comforts were sparse. However, after prison regulations in the 1950s, they were allowed to purchase certain items, including textbooks, correspondence courses, musical instruments, or magazine subscriptions. The first warden of
There was a rule of silence into the late 1930s.
Alcatraz, James A. Johnston, was a real no-nonsense guy, instituting a rule of silence at the prison that lasted until 1937, and basically keeping all of these inmates on mute while under his watchful eye. Under Johnston's very cool rule, prisoners were only permitted to speak at meals or during recreation time.
So they were barely allowed to talk? So you're in prison and you're also barely... That's like...
Johnston, however, cared far less about their smoking habits, allowing prisoners to smoke up to 3 packs of cigarettes a week, which meant smoking cigarettes.
Okay, see, so that doesn't make sense. He cuts them from talking, but he'll allow them to smoke cigarettes. Was he a smoker or something? Because I'm sure that's an enjoyment for them.
Was more common than speaking at Alcatraz. To get around his prison rules, prisoners would communicate to each other through pipes between cells, like tin can telephones. The rule was eventually lifted because it was both difficult to enforce and flat-out cruel. The golden rule of silence remained, though, for those troublesome prisoners locked in solitary confinement, which our resident...
Yeah, solitary confinement and no speaking, you would go insane. I mean, just think about it, being stuck in like a 9x9 area, and you also can't speak. You can't... That would just be mental, man.
Alcatraz complainer Quinlan described as total silence and darkness as his only constant companion for 24 hours of the 19 days he spent in the hole. The
The food was better than you'd expect.
incarcerated citizens of Alcatraz were served 3 meals a day, breakfast at 6:45 a.m., lunch at 11:40 a.m., and dinner at a reasonable 4:25 in the afternoon. But the food was allegedly the best served in the federal prison system. Kitchen staffers at Alcatraz took pride in what they served their fellow inmates, with some even coming from culinary backgrounds. As former inmate Brian Conway recalled in 1938, food at Alcatraz is much better than usual prison fare. For dinner, there's meat, beans, coffee, bread, and celery. For supper, chili, tomatoes, and apples with hot tea.
It's weird because they'll have an extreme here for no talking, but they serve pretty okay food, like...
According to a menu from 1946, meals included stewed fruits, cereal, milk, bread, and coffee for breakfast, and lunch, being the biggest meal of the day, included soup and meat like roasted pork shoulder or beef pot pie. Dinner might include leftovers from these extravagant lunches fit for a king, and even get dessert such as apple pie, cake, or jello.
Oh, dessert, apple pie in prison, man. How majestic.
Like most of us,
Each prisoner worked for most of the day,
just
obviously,
trying to get through
probably.
the day, work became the best way for inmates to pass the time at this federal prison. Prisoners not in solitary could work a variety of jobs in the laundry, kitchen, or on the docks. Inmates would march to their jobs after breakfast and earn a staggering
Wow, so it was like kind of like a real type of life. You get up, you eat, then you go to work. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's not like just sitting in a cell block for your whole life.
5 to 12 cents an hour. Industry jobs like
Wow, 5 to 12 cents an hour. Getting $5 to $12 an hour sucks in this day.
laundry room or woodworking plant allowed prisoners to actually deduct 2 days of their sentence for each month worked during their first year and increased to
2 days for each month worked? That means if you work for a whole year, you can take off 24. That is so bad.
4 days for the second through fourth years, and finally 5 days per month from 5 years on. Alcatraz
prisoners were counted several times a day. Wow.
Prisoners were counted several times a day to keep them accounted for. Prisoner Brian Conway noted that the bell was the signal for the count of prisoners, a really serious business which is done every 30 minutes. In reality, it was more like 13
That'd be so boring. Every 30 minutes, just get up, count 300 people. All right, go back.
times a day, far less than every 30 minutes. Prisoners lined up outside their cells and were counted first thing in the morning, on their way to breakfast, at the mess hall, and counted after eating before heading off to work, where they were counted again.
So all this counting, how did those people escape from Alcatraz? All of this counting 7 times a day.
Prisoners were also counted before lunch, after lunch in their cells, another midday check-in before dinner, one after dinner in their cells, and a couple of times after lights out at 9:30.
Guards used metal detectors to check for contraband.
And Conway
That's
checked
smart.
into
That's very
Alcatraz.
smart.
He noted he was introduced to the snitch box, a metal detector used to search prisoners for contraband that worked too well. He remembered the snitch box sounding an alarm on every man who came from the laundry, which, after what was surely a gentle search, was discovered that the snitch box was picking up on the metal clasps on the men's shoes. A few days later, however, the snitch box remained alarmingly silent as 2 men carried knives in their pockets. The snitch box was one of 3 metal detectors in the prison, with guests and prisoners alike having to pass through, including one embarrassing moment with Al Capone's mama, when the metal stays in her corset kept setting off the detectors, forcing Mama Capone to strip down. Because
There were limitations to communication.
much of life
it's a
inside
prison,
of
bro.
Alcatraz was an earned privilege and not a right. Mandated guests of Alcatraz were limited in their correspondence with the outside world and subjected to judgment by prison authorities. While prisoners in solitary confinement could receive no letters, well-behaved prisoners could send and receive letters that were regulated and monitored, which wouldn't be a problem anyways because, as Brian Conway noted, letters were to and from blood relatives only. On Mother's Day, they were allowed to write their dear, sweet mothers, and they better have, but that correspondence too had to be approved by prison officials. The handwritten notes were retyped, and a copy was given to the inmate. Visitation was also...
So I'm guessing they did that so that you can't like put encodes and like codes in your letters. I'm guessing because a lot of the times the police don't know what communication the prisoner is using with the outside world, if that makes sense.
so heavily regulated as one could imagine, with inmates requesting permission for a visitor only after earning the right to visitation time. Prisoners got one 90-minute visit a month by either a blood relative or a wife, where they would talk on a
Wow,
phone to
an hour and 30 minutes a month. Imagine being in prison and only being able to see your mom, your dad for an hour and 30 minutes a month. Someone do the math and tell me how much minutes that is a day.
all glass window. Conversation was closely monitored, and any talk of other inmates would shut the whole thing down. As accurately
Escape attempts happened every few years. Wow.
depicted in the 1979 classic Escape from Alcatraz, escaping the rock was damn near impossible. That didn't stop 14 different escape attempts during the duration of the prison's existence, involving 36 prisoners. Considering that the lifetime number of inmates was 1,545 men, a pretty small sample size in the scheme of things. The efforts to escape Alcatraz had to be bold, since leaving the island was extremely treacherous, if not on a boat. Joe Bowers tried to climb over a fence but was shot and died from his injuries. The following year, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rose escaped and attempted to swim to San Francisco, only to get caught in a storm and drift away at sea, and their bodies were never
Bro, drift away at sea.
found. Unsuccessful trips to freedom failed again in 1938, 1939, 1941, and 1943. In 1945, John Giles got cute, piecing together an army uniform by slowly gathering materials over time while on laundry duty. Finally, it was John Giles' time to shine as he
That's smart. I don't know how the police wouldn't catch on to that, but that's pretty smart.
donned his piecemeal hobo outfit and made it all the way to Angel Island before being apprehended and sent back to prison. The following year,
Bro, imagine making it so close to freedom and then that's like coming so close to your 20 bomb in Fortnite and then the last guy kills you.
was the year of the Battle of Alcatraz, which was as fun as it sounds. 6 prisoners overpowered the guards and stole their weapons, only to discover nobody had the key to the recreation yard. In a pure panic move, they started a riot, and gunfire was exchanged between the inmates and the guards. The battle lasted a full 2 days, and 3 prisoners and 2 guards were killed. A few prisoners took to the waves and tried to swim away from Alcatraz, but nobody made it to shore, and some bodies were never found. In 1962, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, disappeared from their cells and were never seen or heard from again. This disappearing act of 3 criminals in federal prison would later inspire the aforementioned film Escape from Alcatraz. The prevailing theory is the trio shimmied down the drain pipes after they slipped through enlarged vent holes in their cells and then attempted to swim to safety.
I wonder if they're still alive today, like if they're just looking back and saying, you fools, like we did that. And they're probably like in their 90s now, right? But I wonder if they're still alive. Probably not. I mean, it's very possible, but that ocean, the tide is very strong.
Assume they died in the process of swimming to shore, but who knows? Our old pal
Many prisoners went mad from isolation. Of course, dude. You're in a freaking room for 24 hours a day and you get like no contact.
Brian Conway claimed the monotony and the strict discipline of this penitentiary drove 14 of 317 prisoners violently insane during the final year of his sentence, with several others getting a little stir-crazy. Doctors on the Rock at times would accuse inmates of faking their mental illness in order to gain some type of advantage. Prisoner Joe Bowers was admitted to Alcatraz in 1934 and after refusing to work was thrown into solitary confinement. He attacked 2 guards twice. This fit of rage was inexplicably diagnosed as epilepsy until a few months later when an actual psychiatrist said there might be reason to believe he was truly psychotic. Though that same dude cautioned he had something to gain if he can induce us to believe he is insane, though what exactly that would be is unclear. Once this faker was returned to his cell, he tried to take his own life. He would die in 1936 while trying to escape. So what do you think of Alcatraz?
Honestly, I think it's probably the top 10 worst prisons. There's some prisons that are really bad, but the fact that this is on an island, isolated from pretty much anybody, just makes it that much worse. I would also say it's probably like top 5 coolest prisons. I hope you guys enjoyed. Lord willing, I'll see you guys next time. Subscribe with notifications on, don't forget. And always remember, Yeshua is King.
I'm on the streets preaching the gospel. Got a Bible on me and they still think I'm hostile. Yeah, they spit in his face, mocking him, such a disgrace. Put him on the cross as an innocent man, but he rose again. Save me from my sins. Yeah, 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 yeah. He conquered death for you and me. How could you not understand? How could you not see? You blinded eyes.